A high-ranking military man disappears without a trace.
There was speculation that he may have been kidnapped by some foreign power.
A young woman is haunted by puzzling images.
And this time I saw him slumped over.
Can a desperate investigator use her visions to solve the mystery?
When you reach a dead end, anything you come along, you have to grasp at.
These are the true stories of real cases and the psychics who help investigators solve their most baffling mysteries. In the seafaring town of New London, Connecticut, the U.S. Coast Guard Academy makes its home. In late April, one of their own went missing. "49-year-old Richard Eastman was the commanding officer of the Coast Guard's radar installation team. He lived in Virginia Beach with his wife and daughter, but had traveled to New London a week earlier. His assignment? To tune up the radar system aboard the Eagle, a training ship anchored in the New London harbor. When Eastman fails to report to the Academy for 2 days in a row, the Coast Guard turns to the New London police for help and Detective William Gavitt.
The circumstances were quite strange, as he was a tenured and very senior Coast Guard chief. Not only was he missing, but a Coast Guard vehicle was also missing, along with some very sensitive radar equipment belonging to the Coast Guard.
As Gavitt knows, most missing adult cases are solved in a day or two. Usually it's just a miscommunication, and the person was never really missing at all.
Richard Eastman's case was a little bit different in the fact that there should have been no communication problems. Coast Guard knew where he was. He had a place to stay. He had no reason to run away or go AWOL. He was a very senior guy, dedicated and a conscientious worker. There was no reason for him to go.
Police begin to suspect foul play.
Again, which was very unusual and suspicious, was the fact that he was missing, the car was missing, and this valuable radar equipment is also missing.
Investigators speculated, could Eastman have been kidnapped by some foreign power for the radar equipment he was transporting? Police hit the streets, searching for any leads, any shred of evidence that could lead them to the missing man.
Of course, we did a lot of canvassing where he was believed to be seen last, knocking on doors. And there's literally hundreds of doors down this neighborhood.
Witnesses help police piece together Eastman's final hours. After an uneventful day aboard the Eagle, he went to a local bar for a few drinks.
One club that he frequented a lot was a country western place. It was called the 419 Club, located at 419 Bank Street. He had been seen in there just days before he was reported missing. And that was the last contact anybody ever had with him, was at that club.
From the 419 Club, the trail goes cold. During that same week in April, a school bus driver named Pat Gagliardo begins having strange visions.
The very first night, I recall seeing just the man. There was no uniform, just the man. And I think the water and a car that was almost like a silhouette type thing.
Pat had been taking a meditation class to help her relax, but her new pastime has some unexpected results.
They found that the meditation was a balance and helped me to get refocused and to calm down. And so we did it on a daily basis. It was during these times that I would see things. I would get images.
Images that she doesn't want and can't understand.
And at first I would see a man. The next time I meditated, the man is now in uniform. An eagle is added.
Months pass without a single lead. Desperate to find the missing man and his top secret equipment, the Coast Guard asks the state's attorney's office to join the case. Lead investigator Ed Pickett agrees to help.
Ed was a no-nonsense guy. When he sunk his teeth into something, he sunk in it all the way.
At this particular time, the police had run out of leads, and we had no idea what had happened to Mr. Eastman.
Then, investigators finally get a break. They arrest a man trying to use Eastman's credit card and bring him in for questioning. He tells police he had been in Club 419 the night Eastman disappeared.
And that's where he supposedly picked up the wallet on the floor in there and walked out with it.
And they had removed the cash and the credit card from the wallet. This person now becomes the #1 suspect in missing Richard Eastman.
Investigators need to find out if he knows more than he's telling. Did he bear a grudge against Eastman? Was he involved in his disappearance? But the man's story doesn't waver.
He seemed to be truthful when he told us. We actually polygraphed him, and it turned out to be a dead end. That's the only contact he had. He had no further information on the whereabouts of Richard Eastman.
All the while, Pat keeps seeing things that don't make sense to her.
Then the car now was blue. It's not in shadow form anymore. And the next thing I saw were cranes. These big, tall cranes that are used to lift heavy objects.
At the state's attorney's office, investigators remain baffled. They haven't got a single clue to work with. And exasperation is setting in.
We didn't know whether he had been murdered, whether he'd run away, or what had happened. And the government themselves were concerned about finding him because there was a lot of expensive equipment in the car.
The desperate investigators even send a dive team into the harbor to search for Eastman, his car, and the equipment. Again, they come up empty-handed.
The way the pier is designed, it'd be very difficult to get a car off the pier without leaving some kind of evidence. And there was no evidence. City Pier at that point was, it's been checked, and that's another dead end.
Why am I seeing these things? Who is this person?
In the meantime, Pat Gagliardo is becoming desperate for answers about her strange visions.
It was like a quest. It was like, why is this happening to me? But I had to pursue it because I felt that strongly about it.
Then she finds a discarded newspaper article and is shocked to recognize the image of a man she has only seen in her mind.
I had no idea that Richard Eastman existed, let alone that he was missing. My cousin Sam was a sergeant on the New London Police Department. I called him. I said, what do you know about the Richard Eastman thing? He said, what do you mean, what do I know? What do you know? And I said, well, I think I can help find him. Is he still missing?
Pat's cousin thinks she may be onto something.
And he, in turn, told her to call the state's attorney's office because he knew that we were involved in looking for Eastman.
And that phone call sets into motion a strange chain of events that no one could have anticipated. A skeptical investigator meets an untested psychic when we return. Police in New London, Connecticut are perplexed after senior Coast Guard officer Richard Eastman and his car full of top-secret equipment disappear without a trace. It's been 6 months, and the mystery remains unsolved. Psychic Pat Gagliardo wonders if her puzzling visions might help find Eastman. She goes to the state's attorney's office.
When Pat came along, we were at a dead end. We had no place to go but up.
When I arrived at the state's attorney's office, I was met by Inspector Ed Pickett. The gentleman greeted me very kindly, and he said, don't be so nervous. I said, well, this is my first time meeting with a detective in something like this. And he said, well, this is the first time I'm meeting a psychic, so we're even.
I think they all have to be put through a test because we've had people come in and say they were psychic, and they were no more psychic than I am, and I'm not psychic, believe me. But you have to test it to be sure. It's just like you pick up evidence. You have to test it to make sure it's something to do with your case or it's no good to you at all.
To prove her psychic abilities to the detective, Pat asks him for a personal object.
What she wanted was something that was close to our body.
He gives her his wristwatch, and she begins seeing things.
I closed my eyes. I told him the color of his house. I told him that his wife wore a uniform, that she was in fact a nurse. I saw that he had cans at the bottom of his driveway. And I said to him, did you recently tar? Or he said, yeah, just a few days ago.
Flabbergasted is one word. Amazed is another word. Unbelievable is another word. I mean, you can go on and on and on with adjectives for it, but it was pretty enlightening, put it that way.
Pickett is ready to put Pat to the test. He hands her Richard Eastman's credit card.
So I held the card. I closed my eyes, I did my deep breathing. And the very first thing was kind of a recap of all of the pictures and images that I had had in my own meditations. But then I was bombarded.
She visualized water, and he being in water. And it had to be some way like that where a car could go in because he was with the car. That's what she kept saying, he's with the car.
Then I saw the man in uniform, and this time I saw him slumped over. I didn't know if he was slumped over a seat. All I know was a man in uniform, and he was slumped over.
I couldn't believe what was going on. It sounded pretty preposterous to me, you know, that somebody could tell you this. But when you reach a dead end, anything you come along, you have to grasp at.
To find Richard Eastman, detectives will have to solve a psychic's puzzle one piece at a time when we return. Psychic Pat Gagliardo has joined the search for missing Coast Guard Officer Richard Eastman. But first, the investigator has to make sense of her visions.
When you're trying to take evidence from a psychic, it's pretty difficult to do. I mean, you don't know where to start with them.
Pat clutches the officer's credit card and begins to pick up a vibration. Her visions suddenly become more specific.
Then I saw this ferry boat. There was a lighthouse. There was a Tin Man. There was a long ferry slip. There were things that were now coming to me that were not a part of my previous impressions and visions.
Pickett needs to figure out what these puzzling images have to do with the case. He decides to take the psychic on a drive through New London. What he sees in the store window shocks him to the core.
One of the things was something about a Tin Man. She didn't know what part it played in it, but she did have visions of a Tin Man. Well, when we were coming back on Howard Street, coming on to Bank Street in New London.
And he turned and he looked at me and he said, "What did you say about a Tin Man?"
And in the front window of the store, there was a Tin Man made out of elbows and nipples, and he had a hat on and his arms were extended out and tin shoes on and everything. It was amazing.
Right next door to the Tin Man is the 419 bar, the last place Richard Eastman was ever seen.
And, you know, I saw the Tin Man. I was actually flabbergasted. I couldn't get over the fact that the Tin Man existed.
As they drive, Pickett fits another piece of the puzzle into place.
When she first talked to me in the office, she said something about cranes played some part. And the more I thought of it, the more I realized that there were cranes there during a period of time from when he disappeared.
He suddenly knows where they have to go.
Mr. Pickett says, "It's time for us to head down to the city pier." I still had Mr. Eastman's credit card in my pocket. And I saw that ferry slip, and I looked to the right, and my insides started to shake. They were like strong vibration.
As they walk out onto the city pier, a powerful sensation comes over the psychic.
And my body went into that tremendous trembling. I could feel it, but you couldn't see it.
You could see that she was upset. You know, I said to her something to the effect, "Are you all right?"
And I looked at him and I said, physically, yes. Emotionally, psychically, no. This is where he is. I feel it. He looked at me and he said, let's just walk around the other side, on the other dock.
Police divers had already searched the harbor for a body or a sunken car. The psychic is convinced that they missed something.
He looked at me and he said, but the divers told me they have already searched this area. And I said, then they need to search it again.
And I kept saying, you know, we've already done this before with divers.
And I looked him square in the eyes and I said, you're gonna find him right here. This is where he is, inside that car.
Could an unproven psychic find the missing man on her first attempt? Pickett finds out. In the case of the missing Coast Guard officer, detectives have followed first-time psychic Pat Gagliardo to the water's edge. She urges them to go one step further.
Then you need to send the divers back in there. I know this is where Mr. Eastman is.
During the normal course of the investigation, the police had divers go down and check the area around the city pier.
Pat is convinced that the divers had missed something. Pickett mulls the decision overnight, then knows what he has to do.
I called the police department the next morning and told Lieutenant Bucko that I had information from an informant that the Eastman car was probably in the water right at the Fisher's Island ferry slip. And that the divers should return to the area and check it over very closely, and while they were at it, to do the whole dock.
But police divers had already searched the area and were skeptical about going back in. William Gavitt was one of those divers.
None of us knew that the reason we were in the water that day was because somebody talked to a psychic. Ed Pickett was a senior inspector in the state's attorney's office. Really, it was his show.
That Monday morning, the reluctant divers go down one more time.
We're about 3/4 around the entire pier when one of the divers signaling has found something. I swim down to the diver. First, I didn't recognize what it was. It just looked like a huge rock to me. Kind of exploring around the rock, I noticed something square. It looked like a license plate frame. And as I kind of disturbed the silt around it, I could see the United States Coast Guard markings on the car. I knew then that this is Richard Eastman's car.
I was out of town and I got a radio call that the car had been found, and they were waiting for me to come down there before they did anything further. They were pretty positive there was a body in the car. It was supposedly in the front seat, slumped over. And that's what the report was before they pulled it out.
He was exactly as Pat had seen him in her visions, trapped in his car in an underwater grave. After 6 desperate months of searching, finding Richard Eastman is a bittersweet accomplishment for Ed Pickett.
When he was notified that there's a car down there, he seemed shocked and happy at the same time. I only understand it now. I didn't understand it then.
The furthest thing from my mind, they were going to find the car there. I didn't think that they would find it.
When that car broke the surface and came up, lifted by the crane, and the wave action kind of cleaned off the silt and was a United States Coast Guard car, I think that's when everybody figured out why we were there, what we were doing.
As for the Eagle in Pat's visions, investigators learned that the ship, the Eagle, had been docked right where Richard Eastman's body was trapped for so many months. And when they recovered his vehicle, yet another confirmation of Pat's profound vision.
Once we got the car open, was sitting right there among the wash of equipment, and on top of it was a United States Coast Guard hat with the Eagle prominent, facing you as you looked into the vehicle.
To this day, nobody can say for a fact whether it was a homicide or an accidental thing. We don't know how he got into the water. It's a situation that's still open to discussion. Well, in my 25 years of policing, it's probably the most unique cases that I've worked on.
It wasn't that I was relieved it was solved. It was more like, how could we have missed this thing all this time?
It's unbelievable that somebody could come up and tell you where a car is and nobody else knows it. It was quite shocking. And I think it shocked a lot of people.
Now, I'll put it this way. I don't know if there's any science to psychics in investigations, but I'll listen to one anytime